On Zombie Reddit, today's story is...
My parents turned their backs on me for getting divorced, and now they want to get back together after watching the documentary about my ex's scams. I need help resolving a complicated situation with my parents, both 60 years old. I am a 32-year-old woman and I am facing a dilemma about how to handle their recent attempt to get back into my life. I will tell you the whole story so that you can better understand the context. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, my parents maintained an extremely critical attitude towards me. Nothing I did seemed to be enough to satisfy them. For example, if I got an A grade, they would immediately question why I hadn't gotten an A+. When I chose a recreational activity, they would discredit it by arguing that it wasn't productive enough. While it didn't amount to direct abuse, they had a special ability to make me constantly feel inadequate. At crucial moments in my life, they behaved as if I were incapable of making sensible decisions, and they always tried to control every aspect of my existence. This dynamic reached its critical point later on. At the age of 23, I married Jake, 34, who had been my boyfriend since high school. We decided to get married after graduating from university and establishing ourselves professionally. For the first time in my life, my parents seemed to approve of one of my decisions. Now that I think about it, they probably liked Jake because he came from a family with financial resources and seemed to have his life perfectly organized. However, my life took a dramatic turn after the wedding. It was as if Jake completely transformed as soon as we signed the marriage certificate. He became manipulative and controlling. His criticism was constant, he systematically distanced me from my friends, and his temper became explosive. The situation deteriorated to such an extent that I lived in a constant state of alert, afraid of provoking his anger. Anticipating the questions about why I didn't leave immediately when I noticed these changes in his behavior, I must explain that the situation was more complex than it seems. My experience with healthy relationships was practically non-existent. Furthermore, I was very young and convinced that what I was feeling was true love. I convinced myself that Jake was going through a difficult time and that he didn't know how to manage his emotions properly, so he took them out on me. I realize now how naive I was, but at the time I really believed that with my support and understanding things would improve. After putting up with years of abuse, I finally understood that I needed to get a divorce and that no amount of dialogue or confrontation would change the way he treated me. It took me a while to gather the necessary resources, but when I finally decided to escape, I sought the support of my parents. I turned to them because I had been transparent about Jake's behavior, sharing with them what had been happening for months before I planned my escape. In hindsight, I should have anticipated their lack of support, as every time I told them about Jake's actions or words, instead of offering comfort or support, they found ways to make me feel guilty. When I finally asked them for help, they reacted angrily. They accused me of being immature for wanting to end my marriage and told me that I should put up with the situation because divorce was a social embarrassment. But what was even worse was that they revealed my whereabouts to Jake. My original plan was to stay with them for 2 weeks while I dealt with the divorce, knowing that Jake could become violent if he remained in our house. I didn't want him to know where I was, but I thought that if he found out, at least the presence of my parents would serve as protection. However, just 3 days after I moved in with them, they called Jake to tell him where I was and told him he could visit me whenever he wanted to try and reconcile. They thought they were helping to save my marriage, but in reality they put me in a situation of grave risk. Fortunately, Jake just cried and begged me to come back. That incident made me realize that I couldn't trust my parents at all. I left their house and took refuge with a friend. Although I maintained minimal contact with them, they continued to call me regularly to remind me how wrong I was to go ahead with the divorce. Once the legal process was completed, they cut off all communication with me. No more calls, no more messages, not even a congratulation on special occasions. It was as if I had ceased to exist for them. Initially, their abandonment devastated me emotionally. I spent months crying over the rejection of my own parents. However, I eventually realized that I couldn't let that paralyze me, especially since I had more urgent challenges to face. I literally had to rebuild my life from scratch. The following years were extremely challenging but also transformative. I moved to a new city and started therapy, which was fundamental to heal both from Jake's abuse and my parents' abandonment. I dedicated myself intensely to developing a career in graphic design, a passion I had always had. Gradually, my life began to take a positive turn. About 2 years ago, I met Eric, 36, who is now my husband. He is kind and understanding, basically the complete opposite of Jake. He has a 10-year-old daughter named Sophie from a previous relationship, and together we have formed a beautiful and close-knit family. We got married a few months ago, and I finally feel like my life has the stability and happiness I have always sought. And this is where the current situation begins. About a month ago, a local filmmaker released a documentary that warned about financial and emotional abuse. Jake was one of the main cases analyzed in the film. As I had cut off all contact with him after the divorce, I had no idea why he would appear in such a documentary. When I saw it, I was completely shocked. The documentary revealed how he had emotionally and financially manipulated several women, participated in fraudulent businesses, and defrauded people of significant amounts of money. While I knew that Jake could be cruel and abusive in a relationship, I never imagined that his actions would become a warning to an entire community. The magnitude of his misdeeds took me completely by surprise. Although the documentary used a pseudonym, the details were so specific that anyone who knew Jake could identify him. After the documentary's release, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends and acquaintances were sending me messages saying things like, "Lucky you got away from him," and "I can't believe what you had to go through." That's how I found out about the documentary. While I was glad that Jake's true nature was finally exposed and that he finally received the understanding he so long deserved, the biggest surprise was receiving contact from my parents. First, I got a text message from my mother, a long emotional message apologizing for not believing me and asking for a chance to repair our relationship. Then came the voice messages from my father, in which both he and my mother expressed their regret for how they had treated me and their desire to reconnect with me. They shared more reflections, but essentially they conveyed genuine remorse for their past actions and seemed truly desperate to reconcile. I find myself completely confused about how to feel about this. It would be dishonest to deny that their messages have affected me emotionally. After all, they are my parents, and it is natural to feel the desire to have them back in my life. However, I cannot forget how they abandoned me when I was at my most vulnerable. I will never be able to erase from my memory how they put me at risk just to defend their traditional beliefs about marriage. I have not responded to any of their attempts to communicate. I don't feel capable of doing so. Instead, I spend hours staring at my phone, reading their messages over and over again, experiencing a mixture of emotions that I can't even clearly identify. Part of me feels that I am completely justified in keeping my distance. They turned their backs on me in my moment of greatest need, and now they are only seeking reconciliation because the documentary made them feel ashamed of their mistake. However, another part of me thinks that maybe I should give them a chance. After all, people can evolve and change, can't they? This situation is keeping me up at night. Eric thinks I shouldn't feel guilty about keeping my distance from them, but it's not that simple for me. Although I doubt I can ever fully trust them again, I'm also worried that completely ignoring them is too harsh a decision. I've come a long way since those dark moments, and I don't want this to set me back and reopen old wounds. But I also fear that I will regret it in the future if I don't at least give them the opportunity to explain themselves. So, am I the bad guy for not wanting to reintegrate my parents into my life after all the damage they caused me? Or am I being too inflexible and clinging to the past? Update 1. I want to thank you all for your comments on my original post. Your opinions really helped me reflect on my situation. Before I tell you what has happened, I would like to clear up some of the questions that arose in the comments. Many asked me why I even considered responding to my parents. The truth is that it is a complicated situation. Despite having spent years recovering from the abandonment and betrayal I suffered, there is a part of me that still wants to believe that people can change. I also feared regretting it in the future if I didn't at least give them a chance to explain themselves. Another frequent question was about Jake and whether my parents knew the seriousness of his behavior during our marriage. I had told them some things, but they always minimized the situation, thinking that I was exaggerating or being overly dramatic. I only shared more specific details about Jake's behavior a few weeks before planning my escape. They didn't take me seriously then either. In retrospect, my emotional state did not allow me to see things clearly. I naively thought that, because they were my parents, they would protect me regardless of whether or not they believed my version of events. Obviously, I was wrong. After considering their advice, I decided that I couldn't avoid the situation indefinitely. I thought that the only way to find peace was to listen to what my parents had to say. We agreed to meet in a cafe halfway between our cities, a neutral place. I was hoping that they really were sorry and that we could have a sincere conversation. However, the reality was very different. During our meeting, they focused more on justifying their actions than offering a genuine apology. My mother insisted that they didn't know Jake was so bad and that the documentary had opened their eyes. My father argued that they acted according to what they thought was right at the time, as if that were enough to excuse all the damage caused. It was clear that they were more affected by having been wrong than by the suffering they caused me. At one point, my mother even suggested that I could have handled the situation differently to prevent them from misinterpreting it. That comment hurt me deeply. After all that had happened, they found a way to blame me, even if only subtly. I realized that they weren't really interested in reconciling, but in relieving their own guilt. I told them that I didn't want to continue with the conversation and that I preferred things to continue as they were before they got in touch, each to their own. They were surprised and tried to convince me to stay, but I left before they could persuade me. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt it was the best thing for me and my family. I thought that would be the end of it, but they crossed an unacceptable line. Last weekend Sophie took part in a school play. It was a very important event for her. She had been rehearsing for weeks and both Eric and I were proud of her dedication. Imagine my surprise when I saw my parents in the audience. I had never mentioned the play to them, so we figured they got the information from Eric's Facebook. Don't worry, we've adjusted our privacy settings. Not only did they show up uninvited, but they also acted like they were part of our family, introducing themselves to other parents as Sophie's grandparents. She was confused and asked Eric who they were, creating a very awkward situation. I had to take them aside and ask them to leave. My mother started crying, saying she was punishing them for past mistakes. My father insisted that they only wanted to be there for me now, as if that justified ignoring my boundaries. I didn't want to cause a scene, especially with other parents and children around, so I kept my cool by asking them to leave. They didn't make it easy and tried to create drama, but I finally managed to get them to leave. Eric and I were furious after the incident. He has been incredibly understanding throughout this process, but he feels that my parents are trying to force their way back into our lives in the worst possible way. He was already upset by how they had treated me in the past, and now even more so because they still refuse to take responsibility for their actions. He also worries about Sophie and fears that my parents' behavior could confuse or affect her. He is particularly concerned that they will try to use Sophie to get to me. I fully understand his concern. I sent a firm message to my parents, explaining that their behavior was unacceptable and that I needed space. I warned them that if they continued to ignore my boundaries, I would be forced to cut off all contact permanently. They haven't responded yet, but I know it's just a matter of time. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh. But I also feel that I have the right to protect my family from this kind of chaotic situation. I gave them a chance and they showed that they are not willing to respect my boundaries or my life. I will keep you posted on any developments. Thank you for reading and I appreciate your advice on how to handle the situation. Update 2. I wasn't expecting to return so soon, but things have gotten completely out of control. A few days ago, a family friend who keeps in touch with both me and my parents called me to tell me something important. My parents had tried to contact Jake. Yes, the same Jake who was exposed in a documentary a few months ago for his abusive, controlling and manipulative behavior. According to my friend, they wanted to hear his side of our divorce. I was stunned. After all their apologies, after saying that they now believed me and wanted to make things right, they still needed to validate my story by contacting Jake. To make matters worse, although Jake did not respond to them directly, he apparently made disparaging comments through mutual acquaintances about how I have always been a difficult person and prone to blame others. This revelation was like reopening an old wound. At first I refused to believe it, thinking that perhaps my friend had misinterpreted the situation. I decided to give my parents the benefit of the doubt once again and contacted them to confirm. I called my mom and asked her directly if they had tried to reach out to Jake. She didn't even deny it. Instead, she defended their decision by saying that they wanted to fully understand what had happened in my marriage. She even said something like, "We made a mistake before, so we don't want to make that mistake again." I was speechless. I was already upset that they had ignored several boundaries in their attempt at reconciliation, but to find out that they still doubted my experience even with video evidence of Jake's behavior made me realize that they didn't really care about my feelings. My father joined the call and made matters worse. He said that although Jake's behavior in the documentary was concerning, it didn't necessarily mean he would have been a bad husband. They also insinuated that I might have exaggerated my difficulties back then and that they were just looking for clarity. Their total lack of remorse was devastating. I asked them if they understood how much pain this had caused me and how much courage it had taken for me to leave Jake. My mother dismissed my feelings, saying that I was being too emotional and that they didn't mean to hurt me. My father insisted that they were only trying to make informed decisions about rebuilding their relationship with me. At that moment, I lost my patience. I told them they were selfish, manipulative, and incapable of change. I explained to them that they had no place in my life or in my family if they couldn't even recognize the hurtfulness of their actions. They didn't apologize. My mother just sighed as if I were being difficult, and my father muttered something about how they could never win with me. I hung up on them, overwhelmed with emotions. I was sad and angry at how they were treating me after years of no communication. It hurt that I had given them another chance only to be betrayed again. But I also felt relief. I was glad to realize that I no longer needed to keep trying to have a relationship with them. Although it was painful, this incident gave me some closure. I had always worried about how our relationship ended and I partly blamed myself for it. But now I see clearly that the responsibility was not mine. Eric has been my unconditional support throughout all this. He is also furious, especially because my parents' actions have affected the stability of our family. Sophie doesn't deserve to be involved in this drama, and neither does Eric. We agreed that I should protect our family from my parents' toxicity. I proceeded to block them on all platforms, phone, email, and social media. I informed the family friend about my decision to cut off contact and received his full support. He even apologized for being the one to break the news, but I'm grateful he did. I needed to know. I admit that it hurts to accept that my parents will probably never be the people I need them to be. But I also know that I can't keep exposing myself to situations where I get hurt repeatedly. My priority is my family, Eric, Sophie, and the life we have built together. They are my real family and I won't let anyone ruin it. Thank you again for all your advice and support. It has been a difficult road, but I am learning to defend my boundaries and prioritize those who truly value me. Update 3. Hello everyone, this will be, I hope, my last update. After the latest events, I have decided to put a definitive end to my parents' interference in my life. The situation escalated in an unimaginable way and I was forced to make drastic decisions for the well-being of my family. A couple of weeks ago I received a call from Sophie's school. The headmaster wanted to inform me about a worrying situation involving my parents. They had contacted the school directly, introducing themselves as Sophie's grandparents and expressing their desire to volunteer at an upcoming school event. They claimed to have my permission and that this was their way of bonding with their granddaughter. Fortunately, the school had the good sense to contact me before accepting their offer. I was horrified to hear about it. I had made it very clear to them that I did not want to have any kind of contact with them, but the fact that they decided to completely ignore my wishes and approach my family directly infuriated me. They were aware that their surprise appearance at Sophie's play had not been welcome and they knew that I wanted them to stay away from her. Their decision to cross this line made it clear that they would not stop unless I took more serious measures. Eric shared my outrage. I felt they were trying to undermine our authority as parents and force their presence into Sophie's life without our consent. That was the breaking point. I realized that my parents would never respect boundaries or take no for an answer. They had already shown a total disregard for my feelings and safety, and now they were involving Sophie in their mess. It was time to protect my family in a more forceful way. Eric and I decided to consult a lawyer about the possibility of obtaining a restraining order. The process was emotionally draining. I had to relate everything, from his abandonment after my divorce to his recent behavior, including the attempt to contact Jake and his appearance at the school play. The lawyer assured us that we had a strong case and helped us with the necessary documentation. When my parents were notified, they reacted exactly as I expected. My mother left a tearful voicemail accusing me of destroying the family and of exaggerating the situation. My father, meanwhile, sent an email from a new address. He had blocked the old one, accusing me of being insensitive and blaming Eric for negatively influencing me. Both continued to suggest that I was too naive to understand what I was doing and that I would regret my actions. All I could perceive was their persistent inability to take responsibility for their actions, choosing instead to continue blaming me. They tried to challenge the restraining order and went to great lengths to refute every piece of evidence I presented about his behavior towards me and my family. However, the amount of evidence against him was overwhelming, and I hadn't even had to go to any great lengths to gather it. His mistreatment had been so consistent over the years that even the judge recognized this and granted the restraining order. The order prohibits them from contacting me, Eric or Sophie by any means, including through third parties. If they violate it, they will face legal consequences. To ensure our complete protection, I have taken additional measures. I have informed everyone in my social circle that any attempt to contact me on behalf of my parents will result in an immediate break in our relationship. So far, no one has challenged this limit, and most have shown great understanding. Since the restraining order was implemented, my parents have sometimes tried to contact me indirectly. They have sent letters to my old address, which were forwarded by the postal service, but I have not opened them. I keep them as evidence in case I need to prove that they are still violating the established boundaries. This whole process has been exhausting, both emotionally and physically. Part of me feels sad about how things ended. I would have liked my parents to be able to change, but I have learned to accept that they are who they are, and I can no longer sacrifice my peace of mind and happiness hoping that they will become better people. Eric and I have decided to focus on moving forward. We are planning a family trip with Sophie to change the environment and create new positive memories together. I am also attending therapy to work through the guilt and pain I still feel about everything that has happened with my parents. If I'm honest, I finally feel like this chapter of my life is coming to an end. I have done everything I can to protect myself and my family, and I have set boundaries that I intend to enforce. My parents had many opportunities to rebuild our relationship, and they wasted every single one. Thank you to everyone who has supported me during this difficult process. Your advice and words of encouragement have meant the world to me, and I really appreciate it.